Ever since I got bit by that spider, I've only had 1 week where my life has felt normal. That was when you found out.
Spider-Man No Way Home was, simply put, a love letter sealed with fan service wrapped in a giant Marvel bow. It was an experience, an awesome experience that, for me, lived up to every ounce of hype set before it, from the multiple sightings of Peter Parker to a bit more subtle touches, the falling of MJ. There were a bunch of moments that I just wanted to live through over and over and over again, kind of like the Dr.Strange Loop Spidey found himself in. There were also a lot of little moments that would just be missed if you aren't looking for them. Not to worry though. I love this movie so much. I saw it twice in the same weekend. So I can tell you what you might have missed. So first things first, the Marvel title card has now been updated to display the appearance of Peter Parker coming through a portal on the R, replacing Rocket, at least for right now. We pick up where we left off in Far From Home with J. Jonah Jameson's speech on the identity of Spider-Man, which is spot on accurate to the events depicted in Far From Home, all the way through until the stifled F-bomb from Peter. Which is actually a call to when May first saw Peter at the end of Homecoming. But now a car horn censors the word as Peter jumps into a crowd of people to save MJ. In the crowd, of course, obviously there was MJ, who was surrounded by 3 extras dressed in the same clothes from Far From Home. But these men are not the same men from before. Also, a little bit of a continuity situation here. MJ is wearing the broken Dahlia necklace that Peter gave her in this opening scene. She is not wearing it in the end credit scene of Far From Home, by the way. So just saying. MJ is wearing the broken necklace from Peter, which is a bit of a foreshadowing of what happens at the end of the movie. Peter asking for everyone to forget who Peter Parker is, and when he sees her at the end again, she still is wearing it, somewhat displaying that she likes things that are broken.
I actually like it better broken.
And that also lends to the reason or motive behind her saying wait when Peter is about to say I love you. An onlooker from the crowd says, "You're just a kid?" Which is a callback to the second Sony iteration of Spider-Man after saving the train.
Just a kid.
Peter then swings away from the crowd with MJ, passing by all the billboards with half of his face covered. A call to how Peter Parker's face is displayed in the comics often, and a small Hawkeye cameo is displayed, but not him actually though, just the Rogers billboard sighting. Well, there are actually 2 of those sightings, so Hawkeye mentioned, but not exactly. They then land on the Queensboro Bridge, met by some curious onlookers in a tram car, a similar location to the very first ever Spider-Man, the Sony one, where Green Goblin gives Peter Parker an ultimatum between MJ and the children.
Goblin, we are who we choose to be. Now choose!
Suffer the children. Anyway, Peter then thwips a manhole cover, which is a callback to Andrew Garfield's ending of Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, heading into Del Mar's Deli number 3. This time, which is a nod to this being Tom Holland's 3rd movie as Spider-Man, and then gets caught with his clothes off with MJ by Happy and May. We get another beautiful continued scene here with all 4 actors that frankly I never get tired of seeing from Marvel. From there, we are greeted with a daily bugle thrashing of Peter, MJ, and Ned, which is in a sense where we first see the movie's plot start to become exposed. This is where we first see the revealing of MJ as Michelle Jones Watson, Though the name isn't directly tied to the comics here, we do get Watson for the very first time, which, come to think of it, now lends a nod to the multiverse, since we only saw Mary Jane, or MJ, Watson in the first iteration of Spider-Man from Sony. In the news ticker of the footage of Tower Bridge, we see political turmoil continues in New Asgard, which may make its way into the new Thor Love and Thunder movie. Fast forward a bit, and Peter has now been brought in by the DODC, Department of Damage Control, after authorities link Stark to Peter from the drones recovered from Mysterio. And oh, by the way, this is being led now by Agent Cleary, but not A. Cleary from the comics, Albert specifically here. It's actually P. Cleary, so a different person, similar character, but not exactly. We then cut to MJ and Ned at the homecoming dance in a framed photo without Peter though. Interesting. Is this a coincidence, or are we seeing a world without Peter starting to form without saying it exactly? More on that later. We of course see Peter's Star Wars figurines because Disney, and then a cut to the Iron Spider charging station without the suit in it. Like, how did they get that without some help from previous suspicions? So maybe they actually knew what was going on and didn't actually say anything. We don't know yet. We then see the Edith glasses, which is what Mysterio was trying to steal from Peter in Far From Home, and a good old stack of PlayStation games, because product placement from Sony, gotta have it. Peter is wearing the same shirt he wore back when Tony dropped him off in Homecoming. Agent Cleary mentions that Agent Fury has been off planet for a year, so Peter thought he was talking to Fury, but he was actually talking to Talos, a Skrull, taking the place of Fury, which then brings up some red flags for the Agent Cleary guy. Could he be the Skrull, in fact? Because how would he know that? Anyway, Stark Industries gets swept up in the investigation, so there goes that. The file photo shown of Happy comes from his look in Iron Man 3 back when he had the Pulp Fiction tie, which I find ironic that they would use that. Like, did he not have a public facing photo after the Avengers were formed and dismantled? Is this also a nod to the fact that this is Tom Holland's third Spider-Man installment? Kind of speculation here, but you know, maybe. And then out of nowhere, we get the best legal counsel this side of Marvel Universe Earth 616, Matt Murdock, who is played by Charlie Cox, who is Daredevil from the Netflix series, which means the Netflix shows may just become MCU official canon, because we just saw that Kingpin is being played by Vincent D'Onofrio. So yeah, this could be permanent. A brick then flies into the window of the meeting, which we see Matt Murdock catch, further solidifying that he is in fact Daredevil, putting any doubts to rest. Notice also, Peter puts his hand up to catch the brick as well because of Spidey sense.
I have like a sixth sense, the Peter tingle. That's what you're talking about, right?
We fast forward to Happy's apartment, where Peter and May hold up for a bit, trying to lay low from the authorities, I would presume. Happy still loves his Downton Abbey, as he also watched this in Iron Man 3 as he recovered. We also see his collection of security badges, a slight nod to his top flight security efforts in Iron Man 3. Peter and MJ FaceTime, and we see sketches from Homecoming, or the Homecoming film, in the background. Also pictured behind MJ is the same photo of Ned and MJ, Peter not being in that photo as well, obviously. Peter then says,
ever since I got bit by that spider, I've only had 1 week where my life has felt normal. That was when you found out.
Which is recalling the Far From Home trip where MJ found out that Peter is Spider-Man, which this saying is the second time Peter really references that in the MCU. The other time was in Homecoming when Peter disclosed his new powers to Ned, his guy in the chair.
You got bit by a spider? Can it bite me? Well, it probably would have hurt, right? You know what? Whatever. Even if it did hurt, I'll let it bite me. Maybe. How much did it hurt?
The spider's dead, Ned.
We hear our very first "Go get him, Tiger," a nod from the saying in the comics from Mary Jane and an earlier Spider-Man movie. This, however, is said by Betty Brant while hosting the Midtown Morning News. Betty also moonlights for the Daily Bugle as well for TikTok. We also hear in the background do a flip similar to the guy in the Homecoming movie and also who appeared in Shang-Chi. As Peter, Ned, and MJ walk into school, we see protester signs all over the place. One of them reads "Devil in Disguise." So let's pause for a second and talk about the movie's inspiration here. It's loosely based on the Amazing Spider-Man One More Day comic, where Peter comes to Dr. Strange looking for a spell to make everyone forget that he's Spider-Man. You should read it when you have the time, but the ending is very similar. Controversial comic when it first hit, but actually makes a very, very good MCU plot. So we also see in the crowd an MJ supporter who is an actor and Zendaya's personal assistant IRL. Flash Gordon comes around with his new tell-all book, Flashpoint, which is his ploy to tell everyone that he, Flash, and Spider-Man Peter Parker are friends. Might be a stretch, but this could be a nod to the DC comic with the same title. As the characters enter and walk up a flight of stairs, in the background we now see two more famous inventors, Hank Pym, the inventor of the Ant-Man suit and Pym-Tech, and Abraham Erskine, the inventor of the super soldier serum. By the way, if you hadn't seen it already, Howard Stark is also pictured on this mural. Later, MJ is seen reading a New York Post paper whose design influenced the earlier Daily Bugle design. The paper reads Peter Parker and his Spider Minions, which displays Ned and MJ as stringed puppets being controlled by Peter. The bottom reads his hypnotic spider senses seduced Jones Watson, which is a play on how male spiders seduce female spiders. Written in graffiti in the background is Ditko, a nod to Spider-Man co-creator Steve Ditko. We fast forward to Peter being rejected by literally every college he applied to, despite being such a genius.
Strontium, barium, vibranium.
Very good, Peter. Glad to be back.
Glad to be back.
Yeah, open that. Okay, no.
Everything he seemingly touches at this point burns because of the events of Far From Home. This eventually leads to MIT's letter, which brings Peter, MJ, and Ned together to find out if they got in or not. All three find out that because of the connection to Spider-Man and the recent events that they were not admitted. This then leads to a discussion between the friends, with Peter mentioning, "This is so not fair. You guys didn't even do anything. You shouldn't be punished." MIT rejecting them is a huge blow, especially because it's Tony's alma mater. And a slight fun fact, where the future Ironheart goes to school right now also. Peter then sees the little string of witch lights, reminding him of the one person who could fix this situation, Dr. Stephen Strange. As we transition into the Sanctorum, we hear undertones of the Dr. Strange theme. Inside, we see two people shoveling snow because of a run-in with Siberia, which we find out about from Wong in a later scene. One of the folks shoveling, however, is Emily Fong, who ran production for Endgame, Black Widow, and Infinity War. Wong then arrives, and this is where the explanation, Rotunda gateways clashing with Siberia, happens. We also saw those gateways in Doctor Strange film back in 2016. Strange floats in wearing his alma mater's sweater, Columbia, which can also be seen in the basement as well. This is why I believe Strange becomes a bit angry with Peter after finding out that he didn't even try to have MIT reconsider their decision before trying to change things with a spell.
Our world is about to forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
Wait, everyone?
Can't some people still
We also learned that Wong has been named the Sorcerer Supreme since Strange blipped for 5 years. This could be why he appeared in Shang-Chi and not Strange. And also, since we know that Wanda's powers surpass the Sorcerer Supreme, Dr. Strange may actually be lower on the totem pole than we originally thought. This could be why he agrees to perform the spell for Peter to show his dominance. Peter further pleads his case, saying, "It's not about me. I mean, this is really hurting a lot of people." This is also the same lesson Strange learns from the Ancient One. It's not about you.
It's not about you.
Strange tells him that his request is selfish and that he doesn't have the Time Stone anymore because of the events of Infinity War and Endgame. Peter retracts, but Strange then remembers a loophole / spell that could be used, the ruins of Kafkal. Spell check there. Wong isn't for any of this and urges Strange not to do this, saying that spell travels the dark borders between known and unknown realities. As he leaves, we see the bell tower in the background of the portal, which is directly from the Kamar-Taj courtyard. Strange tells Peter the sanctum is built at an intersection of cosmic energy currents and the walls are thousands of years old, and there was actually an episode of Equalizer shot here as well. Spell go boom. After Peter changes the spell mid-cast, asking for 5 changes to the spell, though Strange says 6, Peter only asks for MJ, Ned, Happy, May, and everyone who knew he was Spider-Man to actually still remember. That's 5. Strange's 6 count could come from the fact that he also wanted to remember who Peter is after the spell, because he actually cares about the kid. This is shown by the difference in how he speaks to Peter, both at this moment in the film and at the end. Strange scolds Peter and tells him to find a way to get MIT to reconsider. Peter then heads off trying to catch the vice chancellor of MIT at a mixer or after a mixer. As he flies in, you can see in his heads up display that Edith is offline. This is because the DODC has secured and disabled all of the drones. You can hear a voice change as well from the usual female to male this time. On the bridge, we see Peter's encounter with the MIT vice chancellor get cut short due to his Spidey Peter tingle doing its thing and going off, and then hearing loud thuds. We also see a random person running to which Peter asks, "Why are you running?" To which he then finds out soon enough. Enter Dr. Otto Octavius, and the battle on the bridge begins after a quaint
Hello, Peter.
Okay, let's pause a second before talking about the fight and look at some of the license plates here. If you didn't know, the director of this film, John Watts, loves to hide Easter eggs in license plates. So here we go. The license plate on the MIT lady's car is 63A5M3, which translates to 63ASM3, a nod to the 1963 comic The Amazing Spider-Man 3, where the in-scene villain Doc Ock first appeared. The other license plate that I was able to see says SEYS1DP, which translated could mean Spideys, a nod to the fact that we get all 3 Spideys in this movie. Now, back to the battle. Doc Ock asks Peter at the beginning of the battle,
What have you done with my machine?
he's talking about the power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
Power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
The battle ensues and Doc Ock rips off some of Peter's armor, which because of the nanotech developed by Oscorp in his universe being a part of his suit and Peter's suit, nanotech now fuses to the arms of Doc Ock. We also see that the arms are glowing red, signifying that they are in control and not Dr. Octavius. This means that his appearance happens before Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man could change him back into his regular self. This is later confirmed by the line, "I had Spider-Man by the throat, then I was here." Because in that film, he did have him by the throat before Peter could change him. After the battle on the bridge, Doc Ock corners this universe's Peter and causes Peter to unmask himself, to which Doc Ock states,
You're not Peter Parker.
which completely confuses Tom Holland's Peter. This is also when Peter takes control of Doc Ock's arms, and after this takes place, Doc Ock says, "Listen to me," which is a callback to when Peter from the Raimi film Spider-Man 2 changed him back into his regular self. This happens because nanotech go both ways. Both Peter and Doc then climb back onto the bridge, where we hear the ever so satisfying clank of a pumpkin bomb while also hearing the Goblin's laughter. Then from the smoke appears Green Goblin. Peter and Doc Ock are both transported back to the Sanctum Sanctorum, where Strange has already captured Lizard. He then placed Doc Ock in a similar prison, and at the end of this scene, Peter asks and brings back Ned and MJ, saying that he's going to need some help. Ned asks Dr. Strange, "How do you know that you're magic, and how do you know that you're made of magic," and things of that nature, to which Strange replies, "You should talk to your physician," which I find hilarious because he actually is a clinical doctor who, because of an accident, could no longer use his hands. They then explore the Undercroft and see a lot of strange things. Turning doll heads, random eyeballs in the fridge. Yeah, just a lot of weird stuff here. This segment ends with Peter heading off to find more people from other universes and encounters Electro and Sandman. Also, notice that because of the fact that they are fighting in a power grid field, the nanotech suit is turned inside out. Sandman helps Peter because at the end of the 2007 film, they ended up with things on good terms. Tom Holland's Peter also tells Sandman, though, "I'm Peter, but not your Peter," which confuses Sandman, but he helps him anyway. After the battle, Peter uses the magical bracelet Strange gave him to send Electro back to the Undercroft, and Sandman doesn't really like this very much because he asks, "Did you kill him?" and prepares to attack when Peter sends him to the Undercroft as well. We then pick up with Green Goblin, played by Willem Dafoe, as he argues with the Green Goblin suit similar to the Raimi Spider-Man film. He then smashes the helmet, but we hear the Goblin's laugh in the back as he walks away, symbolizing that the Goblin is now somehow fused with him. The framing of the ending of the scene is very similar to the framing of Toby's leaving the suit behind scene in the 2004 Raimi film. May calls Peter and tells him that a man that he has been looking for, or may have been looking for, just arrived at the Feast facility, which is the first we see of this facility in the MCU, and it comes directly from the comics. The sign out front has now been tagged with "Mysterio was right," with a circle around Spider-Man's head to symbolize the helmet Mysterio wore. Osborn is depicted next to May as the ranged man proclaiming that someone is at my house. Oscorp doesn't even exist, and my son telling us that this is actually Dr. Osborn talking here and not Green Goblin. Taking a look at his clothes, he also has the Hobgoblin look, although the colors are a bit inverted from the original purple and green. May and Peter have an exchange to which Peter says, "This isn't my problem," a callback to other Spider-Man films in which the beginning of their journey with grief or hard decisions started. First, with Tobey's Spider-Man letting the thief get away, and second, Andrew Garfield's Peter also letting a thief get away as well. And if you take a look at May's outfit, the all blue with a red sash around it, you can kind of see a bit of a foreshadowing here to her ultimate death as well. Fast forward a bit to the Undercroft, and we hear Electro explaining how close he was to becoming pure energy, a callback to the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2 where Gwen and Peter overload Max's chip. We also hear Lizard ask, "Do I die?" but never get an answer because he actually doesn't die in his film, just locked up in prison with a proposal to join the Sinister Six. We get our first look at the Machina Dichotomus, the division machine, the box that now holds the encased spell from earlier. Strange and Peter have a short exchange between each other, and Strange tells Peter that in the grand calculus of the multiverse, their sacrifice means infinitely more than their lives. Peter thwips and grabs the box. Strange traps him in a portal so that he thwips his own foot and brings him back down to the ground, where Strange knocks his celestial soul out of his body. What happens after is hilarious, as Peter's body, still with the box in hand, continues to evade Strange's advances to retrieve the box. Most likely, this is because Peter's Spidey sense is kicking in and showing that his Spidey sense is practically on the same level as Strange's magic. And that even further is solidified by Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, who also says magic's real here, which signifies that the Spidey sense is in fact a magical spectacle that each Spider-Man from every universe has access to. Strange sends the cloak of levitation after Peter to give us the what if Peter became the Sorcerer Supreme from the comics, and also from What If Zombies episode from the What If series. As Strange follows Peter, he rounds a corner displaying the Time magazine depicting Spider-Man as a baby, and Liz Allen on the cover of People magazine stating Spider-Man is a liar. Liz is the crush from Spider-Man Homecoming, and seeing this means her family is somewhere in the multiverse, and we know somehow her dad shows up in Morbius. That'll be fun to find out how that all plays out. Strange catches up with Peter and traps him in the mirror dimension, and this is one of the best visual effects spectacles I've ever seen in the MCU, at least in the MCU movies to date. Peter falls past a few places in New York City and a bunch of other places. So first, Peter falls past the High Line in New York City, which is mentioned to Helena in Hawkeye by Kate Bishop. He falls through a department store where Christmas music is playing in the background. He also falls past the Bethesda fountain in Central Park. Strange then traps Peter in an endless loop of portals, giving us a glimpse into the multiple Spideys, slight foreshadowing of what's to come, maybe. And then Peter starts to understand that what's happening to him is nothing more than a math problem. He mentions that he sees an Archimedean spiral, and that all he needs to do to get out of this jam is some simple geometry. He then tangles Strange in a multitude of webbing and escapes back to the Undercroft. After returning, Peter proclaims that he will do what he can to get all of the villains back safely to their universes, but change them so that they are regular people and keep them from dying. Norman Osborn states, something of a scientist myself, reprising his line from the 2000 movie.
I'm something of a scientist myself.
Peter and Ned do their handshake, and it ends with Ned discharging a few sparks here, showing that yes, Ned might actually have the ability to hold magical powers. We see that play out a little later. Peter takes them to Happy's condo, where Electro kind of shorts out the security system when he passes it. It's like he's feeding off the energy or something. Doc Ock complains, "I don't need fixing, especially by some teenager using scraps in a bachelor's junk drawer." And Doc, let me correct you here. Tony didn't build from a junk drawer. He actually used
box of scraps.
And in the same room, on the drywall, you can actually see the name Slott, which is a nod to the longtime Spider-Man writer, Dan Slott. Peter then activates the fabricator, which we saw back in Far From Home, where he created his suit. The central power for this unit is an arc reactor, a familiar design, the new element arc reactor Mark I with the triangular inlay that Tony constructed using the new element he rediscovered in Iron Man 2. It's a dope element to hang on to because in Spider-Man Homecoming, the Mark 42 armor used the same gen of the arc reactor from Iron Man 3 and the Stark jet. So it would make sense for Happy to hold on to this after Tony dies. May and Doc Ock share words and some water in the kitchen. A slight nod to their relationship, albeit brief in the comics. You have to pay attention to it, but you can kind of see May give Doc Ock a bit of a flirty eye. Peter designs a new inhibitor chip for Doc Ock because if you recall from the Raimi Spider-Man 2 film, the neurochip gets fried, causing the arms to take control of his mind. Peter is also aided in this endeavor by Norman Osborn. The design of the chip is very similar to the design of the previous suit. The production value and detail here is great work by the crew to make sure that everything is as close to similar as the previous movies as possible. When Peter gives him the chip, we can see the lights on the arms turn from red to bluish white, which now tells us Doc Ock is now in control of his mind again. He then transfers the nanotech back to Peter's suit. This time though, giving him 8 arms on his suit as an homage to what he just did. Doc Otto encourages Norman afterwards that he's about to rid himself of his darker half, to which Norman answers, "Just me," as Willem Dafoe uses the Goblin voice here. This helps us to show or to know that Green Goblin is now in the forefront and is the one talking at this point. As he finishes this, we get a really cool slow-mo shot of Peter's Spidey senses kicking in as he walks through the condo. The first person in his peripheral vision is Norman Osborn. And from this, we understand that in fact, Green Goblin is very much in the room. As he realizes this, he calls out and says, "May," as if to tell her to get out of there fast because he understands that Norman will pose a fatal threat to May. He then thwips his arm to Dummy, and that's when Goblin starts pleading his case to the other villains in the room. In the background, May is grabbing the cures or the vials for the cures for each villain. Goblin says these are not curses, these are gifts. A similar call to the end of Spider-Man, the Raimi film, when Peter says,
"This is my gift, my curse."
The fight starts and Peter punches Goblin hard, to which he just laughs at and continues to do so the more he gets punched. This is something that Willem Dafoe actually asked for contractually for this movie. He wanted to do his own stunts, so what you see on screen is his actual reaction to everything going on in the scene. Later in the fight, at the ground level, we see the glider crash into the building, striking May. As Goblin hops onto the glider, he throws a pumpkin bomb in the direction of May, which Peter knocks back away from her. We then see the aftermath of the fight after Goblin leaves, and for a split second, we're given hope that May will be okay. That is short-lived, as she asks Peter to allow her to catch her breath, or to allow her to catch my breath, her words, because earlier in the scene, as they gathered themselves, she said, "Just knocked on my ass, I'm fine." In this scene, as she is dying, she says the iconic words of every Spider-Man movie: "With great power, there must come great responsibility." Though this iteration of the line is directly comic accurate because it includes "there must come." We then find out that May is not okay, as Peter reaches behind her and what he sees on his hand is a good amount of blood, which he plays off to give hope to May that you're okay. She then dies as Happy pulls up to the onslaught of police telling Peter to run before the cops open fire, striking him in the shoulder. Back in the apartment of Ned's grandmother, we see the first sighting of Ned's potential abilities as he opens a portal after saying, "I wish I could see Peter," and out pops Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. Ned opens another portal, and this time to Tobey Maguire Spider-Man with his suit underneath his clothes. Both actors reprised their individual takes to the Peter Parker character, Tobey's being a bit more dopey and bashful, Andrew's being more chatty and post-mistake apologetic. Both come into the room ready to thwip upon seeing each other, which is hilarious because it's like they don't understand who the heck they are until they do. It's amazing. Just leave it at that. They then describe the places they would have liked to hang out to get away from people. Tobey's being the Chrysler Building, Andrew's being the Empire State Building because of the view. However, they find Tom on the roof of his high school because it's not about the view for him or anything like that, but refuge. Simply because Peter never moved into the city, so he needed a place to go when things got hard. Andrew's Peter begins explaining that he understands what Tom's Peter is going through because he too also lost someone. Here he's referencing Gwen, and he also explains that he stopped pulling his punches, sort of saying that in his reality he may have killed some people through his rage. Tobey's Peter describes his own guilt with the death of Uncle Ben, which was reopened in Spider-Man 3 after learning the wrong person was killed. Tom's Peter begins to say with great power, and Andrew and Tobey recognize the saying, finishing it and drawing a sort of kinship between them based on this proverbial saying. They then return to the high school to finish working on the cures for the different villains, where Tobey's Peter tells Ned that his best friend died in his arms, referring to Harry Osborn in Spider-Man 3. And he also tells Andrew's Peter that he and MJ are actually making it work. Ned calls for Peter, and they all look up.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Did you mean that? Or Peter. We're all Peter Parker. Same again.
Pointing at each other, a nod to the meme, which was hilarious as well.
Spider-Man, I need you to come with me.
Who the heck are you?
I just told you that. Listen, I'm from the future.
How dare you point at me?
You were pointing first.
Rude to point.
Tobey then shows off that his webbing doesn't come from a mechanical web shooter, but actually comes out of his body. And like, what? That was the exact facial expression that Andrew's Spider-Man had. Yeah, so that whole scene is just hilarious to me. We then head to the big fight at the statue of Cap Liberty, yeah, pun intended here, where Tobey's back tenses up, a callback to Peter hurting his back in the 2004 film. This was actually an inside joke in and of itself because Tobey nearly had to sit out of the sequel after hurting his back in Seabiscuit. And Andrew cracks it for him, a nod to him doing so without killing the person, which is a callback to Gwen. As they fight, they try to do so in a single superhero fashion because, you know, Spider-Man is usually a single superhero by himself fighting crime. But the only Spidey of the three that has actually fought in a team is Tom's, and he describes fighting with the Avengers. So in the midst of the fight, Tom's Spidey thwips his bros up with him so that they can charge at the villains head on together. Looking closely, you will be able to see the mask of Electro from the comics over his eyes, over Jamie Foxx's eyes. They then go about getting each villain cured. Electro says to Andrew, "I thought you were going to be black," which is a nod to the very first time he's seen Andrew without his mask, because he never did in his own movie. It's also a nod to the fact that Miles Morales is somewhere in the MCU universe because we heard Aaron Davis's lines in Homecoming talking with Miles.
Those weapons in this neighborhood. I got a nephew who live here. Yeah, sorry, Miles. I'm not gonna make it.
We then hear Goblin shout, "Can Spider-Man come out to play?" A callback to the Raimi Spider-Man film where Willem Dafoe says the exact same creepy words, "Can Spider-Man come out to play?" in the Raimi film.
Can Spider-Man come out to play?
He then bombs the box, causing the spell to explode. And in the chaos that ensues after that, MJ falls from the scaffolding, and the framing of the shot looks exactly the same as the Amazing Spider-Man 2, where Gwen Stacy falls and dies. Tom's Peter tries to save her, but is carried away with Goblin. So Andrew's Peter dives into action, and this time he focuses more on the dive and catching her in his arms than catching her with the web. It seems like he's obsessed over this moment over and over and over again for a long time. Peter and Goblin duke it out almost to the point where Peter kills Goblin. Toby's Spidey steps in and shows him the light, ending with Tom Spidey giving Willem Dafoe, Goblin, the antidote to cure him. Strange and Peter realize that the only way to solve this is to erase the memory of Peter, and notice that how Strange tries to discuss or reason with Peter here. Strange knows that he will also forget about Peter, forced to live out a different reality now as well, which I think is the perfect setup for the multiverse of madness. We'll see how that plays out. Everyone then says their goodbyes, and Toby says to Tom, "It's what we do," as justification to why they help people. Tom and MJ have their exchange where she tells him to wait to say "I love you" because she believes that when it is done, it will be so pure that she will have no choice but to remember him. The world then goes on to forget Peter Parker ever existed, but not that Spider-Man exists though. Like everything linked to Peter is erased, Ned and MJ are accepted into MIT, and things look well for everyone. In the end, we see Peter trying to gather words to say to MJ upon seeing her after the erasure, and when he actually does, he freezes and just lets what's going to happen happen. However, when she pulls back her hair and exposes the bandage, Peter asks about it, and she says it doesn't hurt as bad anymore. So I believe she has a part of her that still understands who he is, and especially since she's still wearing the broken necklace that Peter gave her.